Hello, everyone. We're here for another MTG Flavoursauce flavor chat, and I'm here with Wren, a buddy from Discord. But this is going to be a slightly different flavor chat. Wren is not a content creator, and we're going to be a bit more highbrow. Wren, in fact, is a PhD candidate who has a particular interest in game design and the depiction of myth in games. Um, so, hi, Ren. How are you today?
I'm very good. How are you?
Yeah, good, good. It's great to talk to you and great to hear a lilting Irish voice on this. You suggested a topic to me, which is about the depiction of gods in Magic. So maybe let's just get started. Well, how do you want to start?
Yeah. So I guess where I got my interest with this was I incorporated it as part of my master's degree dissertation, where I featured magic as a case study, and as part of that, I wanted to track mechanically how they represented gods from different pantheons and compare it to other games to see how they did. So at the time, I just broke it down to tracking it across Theros, Amonkhet, and Kaldheim. But since then, I've really began to appreciate how wizards have really defined what the archetype of a god is in this, and like they're not afraid to break away from it, which is part of the agility of the game's design. But yeah, um,
And so, just when did you write your master's thesis or master's
uh,
dissertation?
this was back in don't want to even think of how long it was. Back in 2021, no, 2022, 22.
Right. So before. So hang on, that was certainly before Baldur's Gate, I think,
Mhm.
which is when we see a few more other gods. Um, and we've returned since to Amonkhet, only albeit briefly, but with some new gods there. And obviously, there are some new gods in Final Fantasy and in Ixalan as
Mhm.
well. But those won't be included. Well, they haven't been included in your dissertation, but you might be talking to us about them today, no doubt.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. I think they've really kind of like given a fresh perspective on where wizards are going with the archetype, and you can really see that like over time they've developed the idea into something a little more kind of balanced for gameplay, but also something that's I think very fun and fresh.
Yes, and there's been a few more in Universes Beyond, and they might figure as well. So I suppose the first gods were in Theros. So
Mhm.
um, what do you say about the original gods that we saw from Theros?
So if you kind of like read Mark Rosewater's articles, if you can find them these days, or listen to his podcast, Drive to Work, you kind of get a sense that they wanted to evoke a feel of the gods, where they're very kind of there, but in an ethereal kind of slightly absent way until you've shown enough devotion.
Mm,
Um, which is where the devotion mechanic comes from. Um, but like they managed it within like Theros, from the get go, they managed to really strike some fun flavor ideas. Um, with Perforos, we get kind of a representation of Hephaestus, god, the Greek god of the forge.
mm,
Um, but I think in a way, he ends up doubling as kind of a representation of Prometheus, who was part of in Greek myth, uh, kind of Zeus's companion in creating humanity and gave humanity the fire that kind of drove creation that he ultimately got punished for.
mm,
Perforos doesn't suffer quite to the same degree, but the whole mechanic of when creatures enter the battlefield under your control, it Perforos deals damage. I think kind of evokes that connection between the Titan Prometheus and and humanity.
Right. And Prometheus, he ended up having his liver eaten by birds or something for all of
Yeah,
eternity.
yeah. Every day getting it pecked out and it growing back. It's a brutal way to spend your time. And I think maybe it says something that the set designed around the afterlife doesn't go into these kind of torments. But yeah, no, I think this set had a lot of fun representations. Again, like with Ephara, god of the polis, we get, it's kind of like the more wisdom kind of city side of Athena.
Mm.
Um, you know, um, like Athena, got one of the gods of war that the Greeks had, but uh, they couldn't just go, they couldn't go making everyone entirely one to one with it, and like it kind of keeps it fresh. I guess it lets them all do their own combat stuff. You could argue Mogus is our kind of representation of Ares,
Yes.
and really like the only when it comes to Mogus, I don't really have much of a kind of like, should be designed this way, should be that way. Like, because if you think of Ares as like the brutal side of war, like Athena is the tactical kind of strategic side of war,
Yeah.
whereas Ares is just the brutality. It's all about might makes right. Um so perhaps for Mogus, instead of you know being a conditional sacrifice creature, maybe just if you dealt damage, maybe Mogus does stuff, but at the same time, death is kind of feeds into that bloodbath theme for Ares. So it's not I wouldn't go saying it's a flavor fail, but like maybe that would have been my suggestion if I was in the design room, and maybe they considered it already. But uh, I think it's one of those things where it depends, I guess, on like, do you want them to just do like exact one for ones, or kind of go, yeah, here's the inspiration we got and we went our own slight direction with it. So
And I think if they were doing one for ones, they might as well have just called it Ares and
mm,
Athena. And obviously it's their own world, and it's quite similar to Greek myth, but it's not
yeah,
the same.
no,
And we have planeswalkers in there as well. Elspeth figures very strongly in the whole story throughout Theros, and she wouldn't have existed in the Greek world because
no, no.
she's come from a different plane. She effectively comes from a whole different world.
Yeah, and like again, like I think they do kind of like nice. Maybe not inversions is the right word for it, but like while they remained very faithful to like Haktos as Achilles, with kind of like this one unaccounted for weakness kind of chosen at random, while otherwise being like this vicious kind of like strong warrior, as well as a like Kunoros being the guardian of the underworld, preventing souls from escaping, or at least trying to, especially in Beyond Death. I think it is interesting that again, it probably was a balance function thing, that like Illyrios doesn't constantly get distracted by a reflection. Um, when you summon Illyrios, he's initially distracted by his reflection, which I appreciate. It has inverted stats,
Mm.
um, but it kind of gives this sense of, if you can free him of the curse, that then he kind of returns back to normal. Now, in a sense, this kind of goes away from Greek myth, because you couldn't really undo curses or blessings. You could just circumnavigate it. But I think within the design space, there's only so much you can do before you're just tying yourself in knots, I think.
And Illyrios in the Greek myth, who is that?
Um, I'm sorry, I'm after blanking. Narcissus.
Oh, of
Uh,
course. Oh well, and Narcissus fell into the pond, having fallen in love with
Having
himself.
seen, yeah, yeah. So like kind of he was punished he's kind of wrapped up in the story of Echo, um, but he was cursed with falling in love with his reflection, and he was so enamored by it he fell
Mm.
into the water and drowned.
I suppose, though, that's an interesting point you make about the ability to break the curse, because obviously in Greek times, the worldview must have been that fate is going for you, and there's not much you can do to beat fate, or in fact, there's nothing you can do to beat fate.
Hmm.
And that's a world that, for most people, the world's just going to get you. And,
Yeah.
they didn't have modern medicine, and most people were poor or slaves. There was some ruling class who types who had more power, but even they were privy to natural disasters and disease and what have you. Whereas in the modern world, which whose sensibilities are very much reflected in a game like Magic, we have agency. One, as a game player, but two, we just have agency a lot more in our worlds. And so maybe that is a different ethos that is in Magic's version of the Greek myth, so in Theros, that one can break curses. And I suppose that's kind of what Elspeth does. Is
Hmm.
she's not cursed, but she's struck down or affected very heavily by Heliod, but she breaks through and does her own thing. She goes her own way ultimately.
Hmm.
Um, so in a way where the game, it's a nice game mechanic to have this curse on Illyrios, but then be able to break it. But
Hmm.
maybe it's reflective of just a slight difference in the world, which is reflective of our world rather than reflective of the ancient Greek world.
Hmm. Yeah, like I don't say it to be like, well, actually, someone's or it's inaccurate. So I'd say it more to kind of give context for interpretation of like, well,
Mm.
here's how it was originally, but now with this new light, let's see, like, how does that change the context? Because I think that is the joy of, when they take kind of these real world concepts, is they get to put a different spin. They can borrow from it and like just reframe it. But they also get to really just take it in a different direction that is, for balance sake, might be motivated, or it might just be a simple case of, that's just the direction they wanted to take the character.
Or both at the same time,
Yeah,
perhaps.
I'd be willing to bet it's a bit of column A, column B.
Mm. And so after Theros, where did we go in terms of gods?
So next we got Amonkhet, which was meant to be, which it evokes a lot of ancient Egypt, and
Mm.
I find this to be, despite how sparse it is for what we get in terms of gods, it has quite an interesting, I think, design development for the god archetype.
Mm.
Um, So, in the first set Amonkhet, we're introduced to the five monocolored gods, and instead of a very distant kind of ethereal feel of you have to gather followers to appease the god to being more active on your side, and with like a passive effect. For these ones, it was a lot more of a, no, you actually have to uh, embody their ideals. Like you have to have, for Hazaret, you have to have one or fewer cards in your hand. You have to, be active and, taking the initiative and not just kind of sitting passively and waiting. Um, Whereas in the Hour of Devastation, we got the three gods of destruction who were um, brainwashed by Nicol Bolas when he invaded the plane and kind of hidden away to do his bidding. And what I find interesting here is that they do act quite passively. Like for example, the Scorpion God. Whenever a creature with a -1/-1 counter dies, you get to draw a card. And yes, it has this active bit of you putting -1 counters on creatures. It has a lot of it that kind of just happens by virtue of things going on external to it.
Hmm.
Um,
Do you see a difference in terms of their indestructibility? So in Theros, we
mhm,
had indestructible gods. In Amonkhet, the gods are indestructible. But then with these latter gods in the Hour of Devastation, they're
mhm.
not strictly indestructible. They can be destroyed, but then they return to their owner's hand at the beginning of the next end step. Now, that's probably a game balance thing, but do you think there's any flavor or lore implications from that?
uh, it was in keeping with what players were familiar with already.
Mm.
Um, but I think this kind of got players thinking about like what happens when a god dies. So for those gods, there was plans for them in their afterlife. Whereas for the Scorpion God, that three, there they could just kind of keep coming back. There wasn't the same designs because Nicol Bolas already had them where he wanted. So
Mm.
perhaps they're the five other gods could come back this way, but that's not what they were set up for. But I think it also offered a nice pivot point for Wizards to, on the one hand, try out this design. They got them right beside each other, but it also just worked as a transition point for it. Like it is kind of interesting seeing it because from Aether Drift, uh, like Sabson and doesn't have this ability to come back. Um,
No, she's just indestructible again.
yeah, just indestructible again. So look, maybe it is something to do with flavor wise. Maybe it is something to do with the way death is. They're maybe closer to mortal or somewhere in between. And for the Scorpion God, there's an association with Nicol Bolas being able to make use of that, keep some kind of undeath going on for them. Um, but it is interesting. I think with Sabson and we get like a lot more Egyptian flavor. Because she she's the Luxa embodied, and very much is thematic of the Nile flooding and then going into drought, which was this recurring natural phenomenon in ancient Egypt.
Mm.
And so I find it very cool that rather than you having to meet certain criteria in terms of like have cards, one or fewer cards in hand and whatnot, it's more of a clock kind
Yeah.
of it's the time of year where your crops are flourishing because the river's in flood and the land is fertile, or it's in drought. You can't do anything, and maybe by manipulating the counters, you're like acting as an irrigation system or bringing agriculture into Magic.
Yes. And the other thing this is that Sabsunan does is she mirrors the Luxor card
Mm,
um, from Amonkhet originally, and so for whatever reason, the river becomes divine, or may have always been divine in the eyes of Amonkhetes, but
mm,
such is the power of their belief. I'm not sure if it's exactly that mechanism, but the river becomes divine and becomes godlike and is the same in many ways as we've seen the depiction of the river in game design terms earlier. So there's a lot of nice parallels just within the magic design itself. I just wanted to also say that the fact that Sabsunum and what's the name of and Ketramos, the two
mm,
new gods we see in Aether Drift, who probably are the best parts of Aether Drift in terms of flavor. the fact that this devastated plane is still making its way back, and in making its way back to from the devastation of Nicol Bolas, these new gods emerge to bring the people through this terrible time. But these two gods are indestructible, and so they are like their forebears, the real
Mhm.
gods of Amonkhet that were there at a time before we realized that Nicol Bolas was controlling everything from behind the scenes. They therefore follow that line of what we understand gods to be from Theros and original Amonkhet, but of course, like you say, there's a pivot point which is in the next set after the first Amonkhet set, which shows us a different kind of godliness,
Mhm.
perhaps a more malevolent kind of godliness. And so they aren't just simply indestructible and ever present. They come and go, and whatever that exactly means, it does have a different feel.
Yeah, and I think I think Wizards, picked a good way of kind of, I guess, repopulating the pantheon of Amonkhet, instead of just giving like uh, a fresh dose of like a new vibe. We we still have Hazaret, but we also have, like, with these two new ones, they kind of represent, I guess, kind of a flourishing, or kind of
Mm,
a rejuvenation of both like body and soul. Because for Ketramos, Ketramos is kind of all about kind of creatures dying, and kind of gaining cards at the loss of life, kind of moving on, kind of like keeping the wheel turning.
yes.
um so I think both of them give a good foundation of Amonkhet restructuring, and kind of like, currently at the start of a rebuild, and uh, what they're prioritizing, and then kind of branching out. Because again, like, a lot, the big thing for Amonkhet is death,
Mm,
and currently, it's the barrier, the protective barrier, has been removed. So there's a lot to there's a lot riding on how uh, they keep themselves alive, both just on a day-to-day basis, and also just by living and protecting themselves.
and I don't want to dwell on this, just to change course a little bit, but
Mm.
the Hazaret card from Amonkhet, from Ether Drift
Oh yeah.
will forever have the words "Start your engines" on it,
Yeah.
which is in quite stark contradistinction to the two Ketramos and Subsunan cards, which I think are wonderful. Like this, like you say, the
Mm.
flourishing or the reforging of body and soul, and they really show that. Whereas Hazaret says "Start your engines" and has the racetrack behind it, and it's
Yeah.
just, that's on the nose, isn't it? But anyway, let's move on. We can talk about that one all day, but let's have a talk about what comes next. So it's Kaldheim, right?
Yes. So this is our Norse setting, and this kind of shows a very nice um, break in the pattern, where it's not this strict, like, this is how gods play out, and this is how they only play out. They're willing to kind of like go about it a fresh direction for flavor, because in Norse myth, uh, the gods are quite mortal. If you're any bit familiar with the tale of Baldur, um, even the most immortal of them is fated to die. Which, for those that don't know, um, Freya, Baldur's mother, was having. Well, first of all, Baldur had this dream that he was dying, and Freya, his mother, was distraught by this. So she went around to all the realms, to all the things, getting a vow from them to never harm her son. But she never got a vow from Mistletoe, deeming it too young.
Hmm.
Uh, Whether to take the vow or to even do harm in the first place, it kind of varies from interpretation to interpretation. So testing Baldur's new invulnerability, the gods were flinging objects at him. When Loki went up to a blind god, handed him a mistletoe arrow, and of course, none the wiser to what was going on, the blind god threw the arrow, and it killed Baldur because the one thing he was weak to was mistletoe. Uh, but then for the rest of the gods, the way they managed to kind of, I guess, keep this air of uh, immortality was through eating apples of Eden, Idun, which may come from the Christian kind of rewritings of it from Snorri Sturluson,
Huh.
because you may have heard that there's kind of a similarity to the apples of Eden,
Yes.
um, and in Sturluson's telling of Ragnarok, uh, a golden figure kind of emerges from the ruin to guide the children of the gods, who is heavily, I guess, implied to be Jesus Christ. Kind of,
Right.
I guess, bringing Christianity to the Vikings. Um, but I think with this one, there was a few really fun moments of flavor with this. Um, like the immediate, like it's possibly my favorite card to point to from a flavor example is Bind the Monster, um, which is it's not a fantastic card. I don't think many people really play it, but
Mm.
it represents the story of how the gods had briefly imprisoned Fenrir, this world-eating wolf, um, who started off as a wolf pup, but just kept growing in size and kept breaking from all these different bindings that they made to try and imprison him, um, until eventually Tyr, I guess the primary kind of Norse god of war, even though like amongst the Norse religion, you could pick a few for that role. He volunteered to put his arm in Fenrir's mouth, stating like, "No, we promise you'll be able to break out of this. Listen, if you can't break out of it, I'll let you bite my arm off." So Fenrir let himself get tied up and sure enough couldn't escape from the bindings, and he bit off Tyr's arm, much to the laughter of all the other gods, but that was just how honorable Tyr was. And I just really like it because you'd have to take damage in order to temporarily bind a monster, because Fenrir does eventually escape uh, to as part of Ragnarok.
Mm. And Fenrir is Sarulf in this
Mm,
retelling, yes?
yes.
Right. There's actually a Fenrir card in the in the Final Fantasy set, which is obviously then a Japanese adoption of the Norse myth, and then Magic has then reintegrated
Mm.
that name into Magic, even though it already had Saurulf. Obviously, those universes lore-wise don't connect, but we now have a position where we have essentially two versions of the same myth in Magic cards.
Yes, it's been kind of one oddity, especially with the kind of like the Assassin's Creed cards that they also pull on Egyptian myth and Norse myth, but a lot more directly.
Mm,
So like we'll have Thoralf as a representative of Thor and Mjolnir on the opposite side of him, and then we'll also see kind of like Norse gods referenced more directly or like more explicitly.
yes,
Um,
there's a Mjolnir card
yeah.
in Assassin's Creed, which I have in one of my commander decks, and there will no doubt be a Mjolnir card when we get to the Marvel set as well.
Immensely. You could willingly put money on it and safely.
Mm,
Um, but like one of my main, I couldn't even call it really a gripe. It's kind of, I guess, a nitpick. Is I guess the coloring of kind of the representation of Odin, who in this set is Allrund.
mm,
Because like Odin he was the Norse god of wisdom. And again, like it's not such a important detail, but like he was quite a tricksy god. He was,
Yes.
Loki gets a lot of the stick for being tricky, but Odin was quite one as well. But he was like very full of kind of ambition and like trying to outrun fate. Like that's why he as we kind of see in strategic planning, this is kind of a representation of how Odin gained his infinite wisdom, which is a wild. It kind of goes into how wild Norse myth is, because Odin sacrificed himself to himself by hanging himself from Yggdrasil for 9 days while impaled on a spear,
Mm.
and as such, he had to give up his eye for his foresight. Um, and to a degree, like like from a background of knowing that's the story behind it, it doesn't feel blue. It feels more like it should be in black or red as a form of card draw, where you maybe lose, like lose something. But to be fair, they kind of help make it work by having it be that you put the rest of the cards into your graveyard. So you do lose something.
Yes.
Um, uh,
D- do you what do you think about the transforming double-faced nature of the gods in Kaldheim?
hmm. I think it is a really great way of adding a little more extra flavor depth to them. Because again, like if we're trying to have Theros be these celestial kind of like heavenly um, gods who come in and out of influence
Mm.
um, within Norse myth, uh, like it's artifacts and runes and kind of equipment, weapons that play a massive role in kind of characterizing everyone. There's exceptions, like like again, I think it's fitting that Alrund gets a raven because ravens are heavily associated with Odin. Um, so I think it's a very good choice to kind of like pick and choose when it's an artifact, when it's a creature, especially with Valky.
Yes.
Being a disguise, which again, like it leans into like Loki being the most deceptive, which like look, there's a reason why Loki has this reputation. Um, but I think like there's some really clever and really fun bits of usage with it, and I think it was a great way of expressing this extra dimension to the gods where they had special weapons. Um, it really showed, I guess, like extra depth to them while also like giving their personality, but then also like what was a key item of theirs. And this is represented in the cycle of rune cards that you can attach. You can either attach them to a creature, but equally they work if they're on equipment. And I think that does kind of give rise to the importance of your character and your I guess your items that you take with you.
Just going back to Valky, it's very fitting that the the god of tricks and deceit is actually not even himself and is
Yeah.
is being impersonated by another trickster. Um, and so there's a sort of double irony there, which is in keeping with the character, I suppose.
Yeah, I think it's I think it's a fun way of going about it. Like given that they can only like get so much depth onto a card, I think it's a very fun. Like you might as well lean into the whole um trickster part of Loki. Um uh Now like in the Norse myth, he was usually more of a disturber of the status quo.
Mm,
He was like at times a great asset uh, to the god amongst the other gods. It wasn't up until that he was that he caused Baldur's death that they kind of began viewing him as a villain. I believe
mm,
because they chained him to a rock and held a serpent's mouth open over his head, so the poison would drip into his eyes.
Wow.
And it was him like trashing about in his chains that kind of like brought forth Ragnarok.
Mm. And so, what have we seen from gods since the time of your dissertation?
We've seen like from um, the Locust God and the Scorpion God, the whole idea of them returning to the deck. We've seen it kind of pop up on the non-typically Pantheon related planes, like the Raise Boar in War of the Spark. Kind of is a god for the Gruul, and so when the Raise Boar dies, it goes back into your deck with the idea being that it will come back, but a matter of time.
Mm.
Um, and we've seen in some of the universes beyond stuff again with the Baldur's Gate set. Asmodeus doesn't have any of the typical kind of trappings of or what we would associate with the typical trappings. It's a lot of kind of just like kind of, I guess, a toll. Instead of drawing a card, you have to exile the top card face down, and then you have to try and make use of it. So maybe that's one way of kind of paying tribute. But there was the trio um, of gods who would gain indestructible depending on what your life status was at. So like for Bane and Ball, uh, you had to have less than or equal to half your starting life total for them to gain indestructible. So it's kind of a I guess like a desperation mechanic maybe.
Mm.
Where it's like you're coming to them for in your time of need, and you'll be very thankful for keeping them around.
I took that as them enjoying your suffering somehow.
Mm. It wouldn't be far from, I think, the flavor of them, knowing their evil plan or just their evil nature about them.
It's Bane, Ball, and Merkel, I think, is the third
Mhm.
one.
That's the one.
And I mean,
Um,
in Commander, and these are only Commander cards, getting from 40 to 20 it's a fair it's a fair whack off. Um, and you are starting to be in the danger zone at that point, I think.
yeah.
Um, and so I did want to have a look at the three gods or the four gods from Ixalan. So the
Mm,
first time we went to Ixalan, we didn't see the gods. But then when we go inside the interior of Ixalan, we see these gods. And these are the O'Hare cycle.
and
Um,
there's also Aclazotz, um,
oh
the
yes,
back god. But
who's not an O'Hare, but
no, no. And I think there's a very I think this is a very interesting way of doing the whole like the god returning and like tribute kind of mechanics
mm,
where uh you know they transform into a temple, and then you have to like whether it's like pay mana, or you have to like fulfill certain criteria, like for Temple of Cultivation, you have to have 10 or more permanents. So like it's not enough to just pump spells into it. You have to achieve a goal for it.
mm.
um and it makes me kind of sad that we won't get anything similar for like Theros, because like it's another, like ancient Greece is another society where temples were a big part of it. With like oracles and everything. But because I feel like with Teros, there's such an established sense of this is how the gods are like. Maybe with post Realmbreaker, um, that we might be able to see a similar thing, because I think this is a nice way of fixing it. I think it makes them. I believe Mark Rosewater found the Teros designs to be a little oppressive in their play style, a little harder to remove.
Mm.
Whereas with this, um, I feel it kind of hits a nice balance of, yeah, they're doing quite a lot, but and they're not gone nearly as long maybe as burying them 3 cards down in from the top of your deck. You still have to put resources in, but you can get them back relatively quickly if you're maintaining a your board state or whatnot, or like dealing damage. But it would be cool to see this back, because I think that yeah, no, I think with like the temples, there's a lot of I think it adds a nice pace, but I would understand why if we go back to Theros, that we don't see them represented like this, because like we have a sense of how the Theros gods are designed, and
Yes.
I feel like it would be a bit much to break it. Maybe with like Amonkhet, as everything gets more rebuilt,
Mm.
maybe, but it's hard to imagine. It's hard to imagine Theros going back, because it is so deeply established and I feel fixed. And for Kaldheim, I think they've got a really good thing going with the artifacts as a kind of an extra dimension of personality and storytelling.
Yes. It is wonderful, these temples. I'm just looking at the art on them. The
Mm,
temples themselves look beautiful. Um, and one can imagine that in these worlds, although as a Magic player, paying tribute in this way might not be that difficult, um, my impression is that the actual payment of tribute in world is actually quite a lot to
mm.
reactivate or re-energize or what have you, with these deities who've disappeared for the time being, or they've gone dormant for the time
I,
being.
I I guess kind of like re-earn their favor. And
Yes. Um, I mean, looking at the Temple of Civilization, there's a lot of people on that temple. And
mm,
what one imagines that Oher is not out there all the time, as you can see in its image. The god is standing on in front of the temple with adoring
mm,
masses, or adoring faithful in front. But then when it's the temple, it's even more people in front of it. So
yeah.
one imagines that it's actually quite hard to evoke the god. Uh, but as Magic players, we can do it relatively easy, particularly in Commander, when you can just build broken stuff. uh, that more or less takes us to the end of gods for the moment. There's a couple more which might just be worth having a quick look at.
Mhm.
Um, we've got we've got Tom Bombadil, who's listed as a god from the Lord of the Rings set. I have heard Mark Rosewater say that they ummed and ahed about making him an avatar, but decided that that wasn't quite right and called him a god. And it's never really clear in Tolkien's work exactly what Tom Bombadil is, but he's clearly a being of great power. But he's kind of given up on the struggles or the fights in the world, and is down to telling stories, which is why he's the saga man, the saga commander. Um, uh,
Yeah, I guess like maybe the decision to go with God comes here with like they wanted to have the player interacting with sagas and kind of lore counters. And again, like the whole like that plays into the paying tribute kind of, I guess,
mm,
aspect of it. So by indulging in Tom Bombadil's stories, you're kind of gaining extra. But yeah, it is kind of one of the more like it's a bit of a distance from what is shaping up to be the core pillars of the god archetype.
yes. And I would say he's of his own kind, because even in
Mhm.
Tolkien, Tom Bombadil
Yeah.
is really a one of, and it doesn't exist in the movies, for example,
Yeah. Yeah.
because it's just too hard to work out how you really fit it in. But it's an important
Mhm.
detour because it just gives you a glimpse as to the nature of what else exists in the world, and just the ancient nature of the world and the stories within it. But moving on, we see 3 gods in the 4, but 3 gods. Well, we'll say 4 gods in the Final Fantasy set. There's one in the Commander set, the Warring Triad, which is a legendary artifact creature god. And this one has something like the text we've seen from Amonkhet, where you have to fulfill a condition before the triad becomes a creature. Flying, trample, haste, and you need to have 8 cards in your graveyard. So it borrows from that, but it's not indestructible. It's, in fact, as an artifact and a creature, it's pretty squishy, one might say.
It's like extra destructible.
Yes. And not having played that no, I haven't played that Final Fantasy game, but it may well be that you actually can defeat them. So maybe indestructible wouldn't be fitting.
I'll have to take your word for it. I have never touched a Final Fantasy game, which is it's one of my cardinal sins.
You've missed out
in game studies.
You've missed out. But it's interesting that they borrow from that need to have pay tribute or fulfill a condition. So they are borrowing from the god archetype that's been established already. We have Venat, the Heart of Hydaelyn. Again, not from a Final Fantasy game I've played, but that's from 14. Who's a wizard. And then you can pay some mana, and Venat transforms into a legendary creature, god Hydaelyn, the Mother Crystal. So here's the god part. I imagine Venat's a person who either embodies her at some point or summons her. But she's indestructible. So just the classic indestructibility for gods here.
And has the kind of more, I guess, kind of like, passive ability, or more like passively activating ability of the Locust God, the Scarab God, and the Scorpion God. It's destructible, but I guess it's not like the poison of -1/-1 counters.
No.
Weakening and paralyzing you.
And she's powerful. She gives people counters and indestructibility if they're and if they are important with a name, you draw a card as well. So that again draws on understood parts of the god archetype. We also have Zodiac, who seems to be the bad version, the bad god in Final Fantasy XIV, who's also indestructible. And gosh, Penta black, but in any mono black deck, this is pretty good.
Especially if you lean into your underworld leanings of creatures dying and not escaping.
And both have very restrictive costs. Venat, you have to cast and then pay 7 to transform, and Zodiac is 5 black. So unless you're in mono black, it's quite hard to get there. So that I suppose harkens back to their power and the difficulty of actually getting them to appear. Then we have a final one, which is really a bit of an oddball compared to all the other ones we've looked at, which is Ultima Origin of Oblivion from Final Fantasy XVI. It's a legendary colorless god and has flying and turns things into wastes.
Perhaps we'll see a cult around Eldrazi coming down.
I must say, it does give you more mana on your side. So this may be playable in Tron Eldrazi, but it might be a bit slow. It might not boost you there quick enough. Who knows? But again, it's not it doesn't have any of the hallmarks of gods as we've seen them so far.
No, this is kind of very much one of the times where you know again having never played, maybe like for flavor's sake, it's kind of better to go away from the pillar, and like still in keeping with, I guess, Ultima as this like powerful character, worthy of the god type, but not quite fitting into what's being established as the pillars.
Mm,
But again, like this is what I've really enjoyed about looking at Magic cards is you get to see how agile the game is. Like just how it can, yeah, it develops and tries to work through a better balancing, but it can also take things in a different direction to better suit what they're trying to represent, rather than trying to force it into, it has to fit into this block format, otherwise it can't happen, that you see in like other games, I think,
mm.
when they try to depict gods.
And I suppose Magic being a multiverse at its very base nature means that gods will be different in different
Mm,
places. And so we've seen that already. And as you say, it's one of the things that's probably kept Magic going so long is that it has been able to be adaptable, because from the very inception, it was always understood it was about different places all at once.
mm.
Um, I suppose that's a convenient and a good place for us to finish this discussion. Is there anything you'd like to finish off with in terms of gods and magic and their depictions?
Uh, there's nothing too much. I think there's a lot of characters that have like maybe perhaps been in the game that aren't classified as gods that probably would be up there. As much as I'd love to see the Celtic pantheon show up, Celtic folklore is so embedded in the core fantasy. It's kind of hard to make it work, but there are figures there that maybe someday. But I think uh, Wizards have really hit upon a nice set of um, kind of core ideas for what to base it around, and then they can wander as far from it as needs be. Um, but I think again they've really hit on a nice sense of, here's how we represent this thing that is far beyond a normal creature, but without just making it immensely overpowered.
Mm.
It's like, and I know like there's a part of like, well, yeah, they're a god, they should be overpowered. It's like, no, it's a game. Let's reel it in a small bit.
And of course, in this game, at least in its own lore,
Mm,
planeswalkers were at least as powerful as gods, if not
yeah,
more powerful than gods in the early days. So it makes sense that we, the player, are actually the ultimate power in the game, and these things that we call gods are powerful, but they're not all powerful.
and from that, I think we can learn that Magic the Gathering is a game about having faith in yourself.
Yes, it's devotion in yourself that wins the game.
Gather your friends and empower each other.
The gathering is part of the name, is it not?
It very much is.
Thanks for joining us on MTG Flavoursauce. If you like what you see, please like, share, or subscribe. See ya!